Hello, everybody. I'm here today with Nadine Taylor, who I'm talking to, who's from the UK. Hello, Nadine.
Good morning, good evening.
Good evening. We had very complicated time differences with ThinkSpot organising this from New York. Did my head in trying to work this one out. Anyway, I'm very pleased you could be here, staying up later at night for us.
That's quite all right. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Now, Nadine, many of you will know, is a former international campaign director for this controversial fathers' rights group called Fathers for Justice. And I've been following your activities for quite a while. When I first read about you, Nadine, you actually were called O'Connor, and I thought I'd mention that in case people read earlier articles about you. So you've had a bit of a name change recently.
I have, yes. I was born Nadine Taylor, that's my maiden name. And when I married Matt, who is, as many will know, the founder of Fathers for Justice, I became Nadine O'Connor. So, yeah.
And here you are back again.
I am back at Nadine Taylor.
Yeah, okay, good. But I thought people would be really interested in what you've been up to. I know a lot of people who follow me are interested in fathers' rights, the whole issue of how fathers are dealt with and the children of fathers are dealt with in the family court system. And you've been out there battling in this area for many years. What intrigued me is you got involved in this not to advocate for fathers, but really because you were fighting your own battle. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so I've come at it from many angles, really. I started, my first foray into the family courts was about 20 years ago now, when I started a custody battle with my first husband over my daughter. And I had been doing that for about 3 years. And one of my girlfriends just happened to say to me, you know, because we could never really understand what was happening to me, why it was happening, why I was having such a difficult time. And she said, you know, your story really sounds like these stories that I'm hearing from this campaign group, Fathers for Justice. And I knew a little bit about them. They'd been in the press, but it wasn't really on my radar at that time. And she said, you know, let's Google them. Let's find out a little bit more. So we got onto the computer and found out a bit more, and purely by chance. And I believe a lot of these things happen in life for a reason. They were advertising a meeting near where I was living at the time, in a couple of days' time, literally. And so I thought, with a bit of rush of blood to my head, I emailed the coordinator and said, could I come along? Not thinking for 1 minute that they'd say yes, of course, but they did. I was really taken aback, and the immediate response was, of course you can come along. You know, it's important that dads find out about what's happening, but it's just as important that the mums and the new partners and the grandmothers also found out. So they said, come along, you are more than welcome. So I got myself all ready.
Stop you 1 minute? I think it's important that people know you weren't trying to stop your ex-partner having access to the children, your one daughter, wasn't it? But rather, he wanted sole custody and tried to lock you out. People need to know that, I think.
Yes. So it was that's why really my story was sort of resonating with my friend when she was reading these dad stories, because I wasn't blocking any contact. He very clearly wanted custody of my daughter and very limited contact with me. And so 3 years into what was to become a 10-year battle in the family courts, I plucked up the courage and thought, right, I'll go to this meeting. And I very nearly didn't go, because on the day, I admit, I suddenly thought, oh God, I'm being so stupid here. You know, I'm going to walk into this room. We're going to be a room full of angry dads in the back room of a pub. The last thing they're going to want is me sitting there moaning about how hard done by I am. And my mum said, no, you're going. I've taken the, afternoon off work. Your father's got his suit on. We're coming round to babysit. And off my dad and I went like the odd couple to this backroom pub at a place near Southampton. And we walked in and lo and behold, as soon as we walked in the door, we got these very sort of strange looks, but we pushed on through and got ourselves a drink and went and sat at the front of the seats that are being arranged. And I must say at this point, I'm usually somebody who researches quite carefully what I'm going to be doing, where I'm going, and the people that I'm going to be listening to. And I hadn't. This must have been the one and only time in my life I hadn't even Googled the name Matt O'Connor.
Yeah.
And so I had no idea what he looked like, but he was going to be the speaker at this meeting that night. And so I sat there with my dad and I got my notepad ready, and people being very polite and sort of, you know, welcoming. And then suddenly the room erupted, and I realized at that point Matt must have arrived. He was late, and I later learned that that was quite common. And so he came, and you know, there was a lot of noise and chatter, and then he launched into his speech. And I sat there and I thought, my God, this person is saying exactly what I want to say about the court system. Take out the gender. It was a conversation that I could have had myself with anybody at that point in time. And I realized from my point of view, this was not necessarily a problem for dads or mum. This was a deep-rooted problem within the family court system at that time that was bad for everybody, but their campaign was about fathers' rights, and that's fine. So I listened to the talk, I made lots and lots of notes, and at the end of it, we were just sat there, my dad and I, and sort of chatting to a couple of people, and all these people kept coming over and speaking to me and asking me lots and lots of questions. And I was, you know, fine, thank you, you know, it's great that everybody's interested. The flip side of this story is that Matt had clocked me the minute he walked in the room, because I was clearly the odd person out in the room. I was sitting up the front in a suit. He thought I was an undercover journalist, because he knew at the time that he was being followed by undercover journalists. And so he said to his team, go over and speak to her at the end, find out what you can about her. I want to know what's going on, because I'd been sitting there writing notes. He thought my dad was the editor. And that's why all these people were coming over and talking to me. And eventually Matt himself came over. And we started talking, and we very quickly realized we were on the same page. There was no hidden agenda from my point of view. And as the conversation went on, other little things crept into it. We were both designers. We were both working in marketing and PR at the time. And by the time I left that meeting, he'd taken my telephone number, and that, as they say, is history.
You ended up not only getting involved with the organisation, but getting involved with him.
I did, yes,
Eventually.
yes. And we married a few years later, and our son Archie was born the following Christmas, and he's now 15. So,
but you know, I mean, this thing about women being involved, of course, all the men's organisations have women involved, because the men who are going through these systems have mothers and sisters and, you know, new partners, and who see what's happening to men. Once your own battle aside, I know you do think the family court system is tilted against men. I mean, it's much more likely that the weapons that are available in the family court system are being used by women against men than the other way around. Would you still think that's true?
I do. We've had some very what I call dangerous legislation brought in over the last few years. There's one which is called Practice Direction 12J, which basically allows women to abuse the system even further. And I realized very quickly, when I was literally welcomed with open arms, forget the whole Matt business, but the rest of the guys that I met in that night, I'm still friends with, you know, people that I met that night, and it became a community. And you very quickly realize that you are dealing with people who are emotionally damaged at this stage, and the reason. And I'm not saying this in any kind of sexist way at all. The reason that women are so important, I found, because when I was talking to my own girlfriends, women generally are very good at gearing themselves up, organizing themselves, getting things done in that respect. And lots of those guys were at that meeting tonight because their girlfriends had bought them. Their mothers had got involved and pushed them to go along. Men will tend to retreat a little bit when things are happening like that to them. And it's very important that women were involved in that campaign. And towards the, I would say, you know, 5-6 years into it, easily a third of the supporters were women. And that was key. And when we had protests and marches, women were right there up the front organising things. And they were very often the ones who were also behind the scenes, getting the placards ready, getting the banners ready, getting the costumes ready, getting, you know, the mechanics of the whole protester. So they really were key to the campaign.
Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of the people in the US may not know much about Fathers for Justice. What interested me is this idea of direct action. This has been an organisation out there doing often outrageous things. I mean, attention-seeking
Yeah.
stunts, if you like, trying to, I mean, draw public attention to what's happening to men in the family.
Yes.
Talk. No, and I noticed one of the articles about you says you swapped the sisterhood for a Batman outfit. Tell me about Batman. Tell me about direct action.
So the Batman and the superhero campaign had started before I became involved.
Yeah.
And this is the genius of Matt O'Connor, and that's why it has also been, you know, a huge privilege to be involved in this campaign with him, you know, not just as his wife but as his partner in crime, possibly, as the police would call us. But he took a really iconic image, which is the superhero, and he put it alongside buildings and monuments that you could recognize around the world, because the Batman superhero, every dad is a superhero to their child, and that was the basis of that campaign. And so when you're running a campaign like Fathers for Justice, and people think that it was a huge organization with a lot of money behind it, it wasn't. To start with, it was, you know, running on a hill of beans. This wasn't an organization that got money from governments or charities and things like that. So you had to get people talking about you. And Matt's idea was to take iconic images like superheroes, put them on iconic buildings, and then throw into that mix a little bit of breaching of national security. And then you had your story, and suddenly you're on the front page of every newspaper around the world. You know, the most iconic one being Batman on the balcony at Buckingham Palace. That went worldwide. And that campaign went on for several years, and over the years you had superheroes on, you know, lots of monuments. And we did in 2007, I think it was, put Batman and Captain America on the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, and so we took it stateside. Yeah,
very good. And then, but I think one of your most outstanding campaigns involved the National Lottery, which you were involved in, is that right?
I was, yes, yeah. In fact, I've still got my T-shirt upstairs. I'm afraid age has caught up with me and I can't get it on these days. But yeah, so this was a campaign at the time, which was based about the, you know, next time it could be you, which was the lottery's logo at the time. And the next time you hear about family breakdown, or you hear of, you know, somebody going through the family courts, it could be you, a family member. The chances, the statistics are that it's going to happen to you or a member of your family. And so we took that and turned it around, and 6 of us went to the BBC studios in London, and the idea was to take the National Lottery programme off air. We pretty much almost did it. We got into the studios, split ourselves up, and we were going to storm the stage during the live broadcast. And we didn't realise until about 15 years later, when they did a follow-up article about it, that all the guys on the floor of the studio at the BBC were ex-special forces. And and when you think back to what was going on and what I could see and what we could all see going on, you realise that actually they were a little bit, you know, forceful and manhandling of the guys, because we all split ourselves up, and I was the last one to go, because they thought nobody's going to touch a woman. Nobody's going to grab her and kind of throw her down the stairs. So the guys had gone before me, and I could see out of the left-hand corner of my eye 2 of them literally rolling around on the floor, hand-to-hand combat with these ex-special forces. And while that was going on, and a couple of guys were up on the stage, I slipped down the steps, walked around the back of the crew, and just walked straight onto the stage and got that point, you know, with Eamon Holmes. And we were very close to hitting the button. I could see in front of me one of the guys lying on the floor, raising his hand, trying to hit the button at the same time. But it got, again, the whole premise of the campaign work with F4J was to get big money coverage for no money, you know, for the cost of half a dozen printed T-shirts. We were prepared to take the risk, and the Batman on Buckingham Palace, you know, he was facing, you know, live ammunition and police officers with guns, you know, so this was not for the faint-hearted. If you were going to take part in direct action, you had to be prepared, and prepared to go all the way with it. You know, the same in Downing Street when they got up on the steps there. So the National Lottery was a little bit safer. But yes, again, I mean, and because it was live television, it gets that coverage straight away. And over the years, we've done a few more live television things as well.
Yeah. And I really enjoyed the Crummy Mummy campaign.
Yeah.
targeting high-profile celebrity mothers who are, I mean, which I've always been intrigued by. Something I've been sort of personally tracking for many years, when I noticed the shift from a time when people were expected to be responsible parents to lots of women becoming single mums by choice, celebrities, no one asking any questions about that. And then whatever decisions they made around custody were endorsed. They'd give interviews and, oh no, well, he doesn't, you know, the father doesn't play a role in the children. Whatever it was, the women could say anything they liked and they would never question. And it makes me hopping mad.
Yeah,
that,
and it's still
this
happening.
whole idea that we should question people's moral decisions in this respect has gone out the window.
Yeah, and
so tell us about Crummy Mummy. Yeah.
So it's a campaign that actually still goes on, because when it started, we initially were talking about actress Kate Winslet and she had talked in a newspaper article about none of this shared parenting for me. My children live with me, and that kind of comment.
And she has three children to three different fathers.
She does, yes. And
you would have thought these men. Don't you think these men, stupid men, getting involved with a woman like that? I mean, what are they thinking?
But on the other hand, we have a great TV presenter in this country called Ulrika Johnson, and she has, I think, 4 children by 4 different fathers, and hasn't got a problem. They all come and go. It's, you know, she works incredibly well with all the, you know, the fathers, and everybody gets on, and there's not a problem. So it can be done, but it seems to be that there is still a mentality that women feel that children are their possession. Yeah. So we started off with Kate Winslet, and it became very clear that she wasn't the only one at the time. So the Crummy Mummy campaign took some momentum, and it's still. And
it was just sorry.
Yeah.
It's about, you know, posters or take out ads saying, pointing out how she's behaving. That's the essence of it.
Absolutely. So there comes a time, the great thing about F4J is that it is able to, it's clever, it's intelligent, the campaigns are clever and intelligent, there's a lot of humor in there, but equally you can flip it, and, you know, suddenly you find there's an advert in a magazine or a newspaper. There's a lot of ideas floating around, and that keeps people on their toes, which is fabulous. This was an advert we decided to run, and you have to chop and change occasionally. Her Kate Winslet's article had been in a magazine, so you come back with it with a magazine advert, and we realized that there were other actresses, other celebrities like her, and even that was back in probably 2013, around about that time. But even now, with the coverage that we get and people talking about this subject, you are still getting women who think like that. And I find that really disappointing, because, you know, there's a lot of intelligent women out there who are capable of reading the information out there, learning about the subject, yet they're still blinkered into thinking this way. We have I think if I call her Z-list celebrity, that's probably talking her up too much. But there's one girl in particular at the moment who is doing a similar kind of thing, and she will prostitute her child for any kind of publicity she can get in the papers, claiming that she shares care, yet this father has not seen this child for years and years and years. And that has to be called out, because these young women, as they are now, they are role models to other young women.
But that's the irresponsibility of the media. They never get asked the tough questions.
Yeah. So, you know, it's important that we call them out when we see that, and they keep repeating the lie that, you know, her ex-partner is sharing care with her over this child. You've got to keep calling them out. They don't like it, but it has to be done, because as a society, we have got young girls and young women growing up with a really false narrative of what's going on out there. And all the time that we're pushing and making steps forward, it just takes one, you know, social media post by some, you know, person who probably hasn't thought this through carefully. It was, you know, maybe he was a stepping stone to something else, and he gets cut out as quickly as he can be. But, you know, this is a society that it's dangerous, and it's sending the wrong message out there at the moment. And it's still important that we keep repeating the mantra that, you know, shared parenting is the best kind of parenting for children. It has the best outcomes for children as well. And your child is not a weapon. Your child is not a media toy to be played with, because ultimately they're going to sit there one day and Google and read this themselves as well and know it's not true.
Yeah, that's right. Now let's talk generally about the effectiveness of direct action. I mean, I've been out in this territory on and off for decades, and so, you know, we've got a women's march happening today in Australia. Thousands of women gathering around Parliament House, calling it, you know, arguing for the action to be taken in relation to a historic rape act.
Okay.
Oh, that's a first. A sneeze. We've suddenly had a big temperature drop in Australia today. Anyway, we've got this big protest. Thousands of women are going to be out there calling for the government to take action against violence against women. I mean, sexual violence, etc., etc. And people have been writing to me saying, what should we do? Should we have our own demonstration? And I always say, there's absolutely no point in getting 20 people or 50 people. I mean, we are so disorganized, we, meaning all the men's groups in Australia. And it's very rare we can muster big numbers for any sort of demonstration. And it just makes us a laughing stock if we counter a demonstration of thousands of people with, you know, 4 miserable souls. I mean, it's better not
you
to
look
do
like a bus queue. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and they'll probably have more police officers than protesters, you know, and that was the problem we often had. Now, direct action, I think, is still very important. It's not a new thing. The suffragettes were masters of direct action, and Matt had studied a lot of what the suffragettes had done, because before he'd actually even started putting the sort of the template down for what he wanted to do with Fathers for Justice. Really, Fathers for Justice brought direct action back up onto the agenda. It brought it into the 20th and 21st century. But the gender divide on that has never been greater. As you say, you know, what happens to women who go out and protest and march is very different to the way that men are treated when they do it. And that is why I've always stressed, and it's always been very key in what Matt's work, is that when F4J did stuff, Fathers for Justice, it had to have an element of humour in it. It had to be a bit self-deprecating, because you know, our Batman, well, he, you know, his figure was not honed in a gym, let's say, and you know, most of them probably look like Michelin Man more than Superman, because you have to embrace it in that way, because the minute that men come out and say, we are going to campaign for this, or we want this, that and the other, they are labelled aggressive, they are labelled violent, they are labelled anti-women. And so you have to be clever, you have to be creative, you have to be intelligent. And that is why there were always lots of ideas on the drawing board at F4J, and you could flip from a protest to a small demonstration to an advertising campaign. We did do marches, and in the early days there were some very big marches, and a lot of people came along. But as you say, it's very hard to get people motivated. You know, you get them, oh, I've got to go to work, and, you know, this kind of thing. And you're like, oh, come on, God, you know. And in the end, we realized that the smaller the team, you can have as many people supporting as you want. But sometimes having a small elite team, if you like, of people who are prepared to do the direct action, who are prepared to do specific things, and you kept that team small and intimate and agile, if you like, to do the key things that you wanted to do, that worked better. We had lots of different things, because there are a lot of people who are quite happy to sit at home in their armchair and be on their laptop and work that way. Not everybody wants to climb a building and put their life at risk. We know that. So you have to have the sort of mixture of people. The other problem we had, and I'm sure that it probably hasn't reached your groups and things yet, was that the police took a very different view to the kind of things that we were doing, because we were breaking national security. And the police don't ever like being made a fool of. you know, the classic, you know, he's behind you, and the policeman turns around and there's a protester up behind him and he didn't see him. And so certainly the Metropolitan Police were very, very nervous, shall we say, for quite some time. And they spent a lot of time trying to infiltrate the organization. And that's why I joke at the beginning, and Matt thought I was an undercover journalist or an undercover policeman, but we had a lot of that. And it reached a point where even Matt and I, because we were now married and together and working on the campaign, we realized that the team sometimes had to be even as just Matt and I. So there was no chance of people infiltrating. They couldn't infiltrate us. We were, the perfect team, if you liked. Nobody could get into what we were thinking. And, we were living and working together. And so a lot of what was going on in our ideas eventually couldn't go anywhere else until it suddenly was out there and caught people unawares. But I think you have to mix it up. I think there has to be some kind of direct action. One thing that was very important for what we were doing always was the photograph, the image that was then projected out on the newspapers, on the media and things like that. So that's where the iconic Batman on Buckingham Palace thing was so iconic. You couldn't help but, send that around the world. And that was always important to us. And that's a testament to Matt's genius, really. He was able to visualize where the campaign could go, what he needed to do on very, very, well, sometimes on no money at all. Absolutely no money. The cost of a fancy dress outfit and a ladder. And that's what I think you have to do, because there are lots of organizations out there who have, and we found it, who were being given government money to kind of counter us, to try and silence us. So you had to be bolder and braver. And I don't think, without blowing our trumpet too much, I don't think there's been another direct action organization or campaign group out there since that's done anything quite like we've done. Matt rewrote the book, if you like.
Did it? I mean, the question is, did it work? What did it achieve? Do you think, for instance, did you find you started to influence the media? Do you think you started to influence the general public? And then we'll talk about other things.
Yeah, so I would say sort of 20, 30 years ago, there was no conversation about the family courts, fathers' rights, any kind of equality, not even really talking about equality for women in the way they do now. That just was not on the agenda. Yeah. And Matt changed that agenda. He put it on the front page of every newspaper, so you could not ignore it. You had to talk about it. And you've got to remember there's a lot of stigma still about family breakdown. I know when it was happening to me, people would cross over the road from my parents so that they didn't have to talk to them, because they would be thinking, well, no smoke without fire. Her husband wouldn't be trying to take the child off her if there wasn't a jolly good reason, and things like that. And then 10 years later, that woman would be crying on my mother's shoulder in the street, because guess what? It's happened to her son, and it takes every, bone of my father's body to say, I told you so, or not say, I told you so. But it is that it was a social pariah to be talking about that kind of thing. It was happening, but it was happening in secret, because the courts themselves are secret. And so people really weren't talking about it. What we have now on the curriculum in this country is Fathers for Justice. This is talked about in schools and colleges.
Wow.
It's talked about as part of the, the curriculum and the social discussion that they have to do. It's become a pop culture. People will do pastiches of it in comedy shows. References to it will come up in TV programs. There was, I don't know whether you're aware of a long-running soap in the UK called Coronation Street, and there was a whole 2 or 3 evenings one week about a Grandparents for Justice campaign with, one of the characters dressed up and he was on the roof of the building. That is how Fathers for Justice has become integrated in society now. Yeah, pretty much most people will have heard about it. And so they will know roughly what, they may not know the details, but they will know key things about the campaign and family courts. And sadly, more and more people are going through the family courts. And we run one of those organizations and businesses that doesn't really want to exist. You know, the ideal would be not to be having people ringing up, crying down the phone at you, wanting help, wanting to see their children. We don't want to be doing what we're doing. You know, we don't want to be here. But it is getting worse, as in the volumes of people going through the court. I wouldn't necessarily say the system itself has got worse, but the volume of people going through the courts now has actually made the court system start to grind to a really slow pace, and that in itself then has a negative effect on everybody. Yeah. But I think the direct action work, it had to be a really short, sharp, powerful shock at the beginning to get the attention of everybody, and then at that point where it said, right, now you're looking at us, this is what we've got to say, and you have to come in then with the intelligent arguments, and that's when the sitting down with the politicians has to start. It's that you've got to get their attention. They're going to say
they did start reaching out to you finally, the politicians.
They did. I mean, it's always been very reluctant, I have to say. Nobody's ever, wanted to welcome you with open arms. It's always been a begrudging, well, we've got an election coming up, we better give them something to keep them quiet because we don't want them turning up on our, household roof and that sort of thing. So there was a little bit of a turning point in 2010 with the then Conservative Party. David Cameron was coming into power. There were a few changes, and there was a little bit of family law review going on. But like most politicians, and I apologise to the few who are there for the right reasons, they'll say whatever they want you to hear when they want to get elected, and then as soon as they're in, sorry, they won't even answer your email. So there was a lot of that going on, and there always has been a lot of that. I think at the beginning we thought, well, Matt certainly thought he could do this all in sort of 2 or 3 years, but 20 years later he's still here. But people are now talking about it, which they weren't 20 years ago. And there are a few politicians out there who are prepared to put their head above the parapet. But as Ian Duncan Smith said, he was a former leader of the Conservative Party. He said it's not a sexy subject. You want to raise this subject, you'll end up in the political wilderness.
Yeah,
and
well, but to me that speaks to the power of the women's movement. I mean, the feminists. I mean, I don't know whether you'd agree, but I essentially feel that we should have enormous public support for this, because what's happened in those 20 years is we've had a couple of generations of families being affected by the family court. We've had generations of children growing up not seeing their fathers. Luckily, many of them learn as they grow up that the dad who was painted as a horrible beast is actually a decent man who was kept from them, out of their lives. And there's a lot of learning that's gone on over these decades in the community. And I think there'd be very few people in the community who don't know someone who's gone through, who hasn't really suffered as a result of the family law system. So that, there has been that societal change. But what's also happened is the feminist movement has got a total grip, in Australia at least, on all the institutions. They have wound back in Australia all the reforms we had under particular government, under the Howard government, in terms of setting up joint parental responsibility, essentially a sort of presumption of shared parenting to start off with. And they've managed to wind that back using the violence card, using accusations of violence. And I feel overall in Australia, the family court system was looking really good. We were exemplar for the world at one point, where we got it right. We said what matters is children's access to both parents. And, the Howard government said that loud and clear. And the women's movement, the feminists have been so clever in arguing for the protection of children against violent men, and establishing a system where accusations of violence, accusations of child sexual abuse absolutely throws all that as presumption of shared care out the window.
It does.
And it's worked a treat. They have done so well. And now they're bringing in the coercive control legislation across Australia, and that's going to be one more aspect of this armoury that's going to be used against men in the family court. We're losing loud and clear in Australia.
I think while we have made huge strides, and one of the benefits of doing what I do, which is the Mackenzie friend work, is that, you know, I'm in court pretty much, you know, most days.
We better explain that, because we haven't got onto it.
Yes.
So let's go back. So you, in the end, you left Fathers for Justice, and you went up. Yeah. But I'm sorry. Yeah. You explain. Yeah.
Yeah. So I well, several years ago, actually, it's probably been about 16 years now, I've been working as a Mackenzie friend, which is not a solicitor, but if you can't afford a solicitor and you need to go to court, you can take somebody with you who can sit beside you, help you, guide you through the process. One of the benefits,
people may not, sorry, Nadine, people may not, where did Mackenzie come from? Where's that name come from?
It goes back to some case law where a gentleman wanted to go into court, and he wanted to take his friend with him for support and advice and assistance. And that gentleman's name was Mackenzie, so hence the Mackenzie friend came from it, and it became case law. So you don't have to go into court on your own. Nobody should go into court on their own, you know, without any understanding of what is happening to them. They have support staff in courts for similar things, but a Mackenzie friend like myself is a professional person who actively works with parents. Mainly, I do mainly fathers, and I go to court with them, but I help them with every aspect of their case as well. Some preparing their statements, getting them ready for the court hearings. And one of the advantages of doing that is that alongside the campaign work and seeing how governments have failed, I can see exactly what's going on in the courts as well. And so when I see change, positive change, and I have come across positive decisions, I'm happy to call that out as well, and acknowledge that and say, you know, I've seen this today. This judge in particular, you know, made a very fair and proportionate decision. And I would say that there has been a change in the courts, definitely. What happened to me nearly 20 years ago would not happen now, because the processes of a court case would not allow that. It just simply wouldn't allow a case to run for 10 years in the way that mine did and got out of control. So that is a positive change. But one of the things, and I there was about 18 months ago, I had a run of judges who could literally have been reading from the FJ handbook, you know, the things that they were saying. And when I looked into it in a little bit more detail, they were all roughly similar age. I worked out that they must have trained at around about the same time, and they would have been training and becoming judges really in the midst of the campaign. So my conclusion was that we must have been getting across to somebody, because that, you know, they literally could have been quoting from our manifesto, and that to me was positive, and that was positive change. But there's still more to be done, because what has happened is that we seem to have taken a few steps forward, and we're now being pushed back by a tsunami. And it's a feminist tsunami. And one of the things that came in, it was something called Practice Direction 12J. And what that means is that if there is any allegation of domestic violence, domestic abuse made at the outset of a court process, there can be no contact between the children, and it will be the father. Because I'll come to a case to give you an example in a minute. There will be no contact between the parent and those children until the court has made findings in that case. And that can sometimes take up to 6 months, 9 months for that to happen. So a precedent has been set where the children are not seeing the father. And those allegations don't have to be true. They don't have to be proven at the outset. You simply just have to say, this happened, without anything to back it up. And so that, let's say, mistruth is put on the court form. It stays there until a judge makes a finding. And that can be months and months. Now, I know that this is used pretty much I would say 99% of the time against men. I had a case a few years ago where the mother had stabbed the father in the head with a kitchen knife. Okay, she had been arrested. This was his example of domestic abuse on his form. Mother claimed that he had been financially controlling because she didn't have a credit card. And the court, at our very first hearing, stopped all contact between the father and the child. The child stayed with the mother, and it took about 9 months for the father to get his contact reinstated. Yeah,
but of course, what happens is if the man is denied contact, particularly if you've got very young children, and if you deny them contact for a sufficient period, then the judges will argue, well, we can't upset the status quo.
Exactly. Status quo has been set.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so, I mean, it works a treat, this argument.
But and that is where people like myself, excuse me, because I know what is going on in the system, I'm constantly looking and researching and bits and pieces. I will try and change the course of a hearing like that, because I know that there are programs like child intervention programs where you can reintroduce contact. But if nobody mentions that, it never happens.
Yeah.
You know, so it takes, you know, and there are a lot of people who won't mention it because they don't want to mention it because that's not their agenda. You know, so people like me, I have a lot of, you know, contacts and references and people that I can go to, and I can bring those things in. So I will be constantly mentioning those sort of things so that no stone is left unturned. But you can get into cases where, you know, those sort of things are deliberately not mentioned, unfortunately. And so you have a case where there is no possibility of contact being reintroduced. But the principle should always be that we should find some way of reintroducing that contact, whether it's indirectly and you build it up, but it should never be a case of no contact.
Yeah. And of course, what we have is, you know, if there's an accusation of violence, the man could just get removed immediately from the house, and he's now living God only knows where, because he's got no, you know, she's frozen all the accounts,
and you go into that perpetual cycle.
He's in some caravan or whatever, and how can he possibly have the children in those circumstances? Exactly. If he wants contact with the children, he has to pay often for supervised contact, which costs a lot of money.
It does cost a lot of money.
I mean, in Australia, it's just been so maddening, because we've seen real progress in all sorts of ways. I was on various family law committees under the Howard government, and we, you know, there were following all of that. So were really important innovations in terms of trying to keep the people away from the family court, setting up systems where there had to be compulsory mediation, which is obviously the way to go, get people to negotiate outcomes.
It has to be compulsory. And the problem with mediation, certainly in the UK, is that it's not compulsory. And if a father is filling out his application to go to court and invites the mother to go to mediation, she doesn't have to.
Yeah, well, it's supposed to be compulsory, but if he's a violent man, you don't have to go near it.
It's the father who's filling in the form.
Yeah,
so,
and you know, it's supposed to be compulsory, but also, I mean, in some of these big organisations running the mediation, there is a distinct bias against men. A lot of the mediators are women. You know, the same thing that applies in the big counselling organisations where it's predominantly women. I mean, they all have their agendas.
Yeah,
and we're seeing
sometimes, you know,
sometimes controlled by the feminist agenda. And,
you know, I mean, sometimes going to court is, you know, the only way that you are going to pick apart a very complicated and conflicted situation. But, you know, if I always say to people, look, you know, if you can find a way of not going to court, please do, because it is a very emotionally, financially draining situation. It's not good or healthy for you or mum, and certainly not for your children.
No.
And nobody will thank you if you've, you know, thrown, you know, 100, 200,000 pounds of the family money, you know, into solicitors and the court system, and you're all destitute at the end of it. It's never ever a good thing. So if you can stay away, absolutely stay away. But I mean,
often you have one person, you know, desperate for that sensible approach, and the other person, as you say, refuses. I mean, it reminds me all those years. I worked for a long time looking at the issue of negotiating sexual desire in a marriage, where you know, usually it was the man desperate. Well, I was going to say desperate for more sex in his marriage. It's usually very often desperate for any sex in his marriage. And you know, you could get them. You know, you could set up a counselling appointment, unless she wanted to change, unless she saw having a sexual relationship as a critical part of that marriage. It just wasn't going to happen. And it's exactly the same thing. Unless the two of them are willing to properly enter into a proper negotiation in a mediation setting, it just doesn't happen. And people can just block it.
Occasionally I have, I've had a couple of cases in the last, I would say 18 months, where judges have realized that, you know, they shouldn't be here. You know,
That's right.
they're looking at this case and they're feeling quite desperate, and, you know, without saying, what the hell are you two doing here? You know, they'll say it a little bit more politely than that. And they have ordered that they've gone away to mediation.
Yeah.
And it would be great if more judges could do that. Having said that, what you agree at mediation has to be binding at the end of it. It can't just be a piece of paper that the mediator, you know, signs off on, because if it's not legally binding, it's not worth the paper it's written on. It's going
well, even if it is, Nadine, I mean, you know,
it'll break.
the
It can break down.
history of the family courts in not enforcing their own orders is an absolute disgrace. As
well,
we know,
the last 12 months in the UK has been a real, I think, sea change in that the whole COVID situation has shine a light on the family court system. Cases have gone through the roof. There's no doubt about that. One of the biggest problems we had right at the beginning was the breaching of existing orders. Absolutely. And that wave of people going back to court trying to enforce their orders because of the COVID lockdowns and people not really understanding, I think in a lot of cases at the beginning, what they were allowed to do and what they couldn't do. But there were a lot of mums, and I'm sad to say this, who used the COVID situation to stop contact. So we were hit with two things. We had a whole raft of people coming into court from March last year onwards trying to enforce existing orders. That created a wave and a timeline going up. On top of that, being at home with your partner, let's be honest, it's been like a 12-month Christmas holiday. For a lot of people, it has highlighted things that are wrong in your relationship, and it forced a lot of people into, you know, breaking up when, you know, maybe they wouldn't have done, or it fast-tracked a breakup. So there was
very dangerous to spend too much time with each other, isn't it?
It's far better to live in two separate houses and be done with it. So we had all that coming in as well, and the courts went into meltdown. But one of the good things that came out of all this, if there can be a good thing, is that the courts had to suddenly start doing video hearings and telephone hearings. And whereas before I would take the whole day, I'd drive all the way down to, I don't know, Kent or somewhere for a half-hour, 1 hour hearing, and then drive all the way back again. That was my day gone. Now we've got it on the telephone, and they had to get that in place really, really quickly, because the volume of applications coming into the court was not going to be sustained because we couldn't physically go to court. We had to find another way. So that has been a positive, the telephone and video hearings, and I'm really hoping that will stay in place and we will make use of that moving forward. But the number of applications that went to court went through the roof last year, and we are still trying to catch up with that. And that is a very difficult situation with, you know, the volume of people. You're not getting CAFCAS spending enough time, you know, the court advisory service people, they're not spending as much time on cases as they would have done. I'm seeing reports that are really badly written, clearly rushed and written the night before and thrown into court. You know, it really doesn't do anybody any justice, certainly doesn't do the professionals who put their name to it justice either. So there are a lot of things that have happened that have made things worse. And I do worry that we are now moving into a very dangerous time where the universe has taken, certainly this last week, I feel it more than anything, that we should start to feel very worried, I think, about the future of our sons and the life ahead of them, because we have a society at the moment, and this week it's been really highlighted, that you must believe somebody no matter what they say, and you must never question what they say or question their truth, as Oprah likes to put it. And when you are somebody who is working in the whole field, which is meant to be based around truth and justice and legal terminology, we are now entering, I think, a very worrying period where women can say and do what they like. They cannot be challenged. And if we challenge it, we are the aggressors. Yeah. I heard somebody say this week that we need to re-educate our sons. Now, hang on a minute. No, you know, my son is no different from anybody else. He's no different from my daughter. If anything, we have to re-educate our daughters as well. okay, because it's about time that they realize that they too will be mothers one day, and this could be happening to their child. So everybody needs to look at what they're doing, because in the same way that it becomes socially unacceptable to drink and drive and potentially cause an accident and things like that, it should become socially unacceptable to only take one person's view as the truth, not challenge things, and deny somebody their child in their life. You know, whether it's a mum or dad, but I think that should become socially unacceptable. It's starting to get there, but I am worried at the moment that this almost this fanatical feminist voice that we're hearing this week, that's coming across
the world,
yeah, it has, and
this is not an accident, Nadine. This is not an accident.
And the other, yeah, and I think that movement at the moment is really, really worrying. I think that the information that's going out there needs to be checked and double checked, and it's our job, unfortunately, as parents, to kind of educate our own children. But what I'm really fearing is this new woke anti-men cancel culture that's coming into every aspect of our lives at the moment, and it's been coming in at a rate of knots this last week in particular. I think we're going to have the mother of all battles when it comes to fighting for men's rights going forward. I think that, you know, we're going to look back over the last 20 years and think, you know what, actually that was pretty damn easy. What we're going to face now is going to be really, really tough.
I think that's true. You know, Nadine, it's been so good talking to you. I mean, I was thinking about how often I end up talking to women, which has really said a lot about all these issues, because women are the only ones who can. You know, I talk to Janice Flamingo, and men who express the sort of views we express just would have, you know, most of them would have a much harder time than we do.
They would. It was interesting right at the beginning of the campaign, when I first started being put forward in front of the media and on the television and on the radio. Initially, the journalists were like, "No, we don't want to talk to you. You're not a dad. We don't want to talk to you. You know, blah blah blah." And I was like, "No, sorry, you're going to speak to me. I am the only person that's going to be speaking to you from the organisation." I had to kind of force my way in. But I realised very quickly that actually I could wrong foot these people, because I am not a big, you know, hairy, hopefully ugly bloke that's going to come down, you know, talking to them in a, I was just there putting the facts across to them, and I wasn't what they expected, and it made people listen, and eventually, when you just keep saying, "No, you're going to have me, you're going to have me, you're going to have me," they had to accept it. So there was a real kind of reverse kind of anti, you know, sexist thing going on at the beginning for a woman to be fronting up a men's campaign. And again, that was coming from the media, from the journalists. So I had to just keep pushing and forcing my way through a little bit. But, you know, it comes back to my point that at the end of the day, all these women out there who are, you know, saying what they're saying, and the victim culture and all the rest of it that goes with it, you could eventually have a son that goes through this himself. And what are you going to do? Are you going to walk away from him? You're not going to walk away from him. You're going to do, because your instinct is going to tell you to do whatever you can for your son. Yeah. I hope to God.
Of course, that's why I've got involved this Mothers of Sons organisation, helping this group of mothers get out there and speak on behalf of their sons. I mean, women have to get active on this stuff. I mean, men too, but I more and more think women are the bulk of ordinary women who doesn't want a world where only women are believed, have to get out there and start speaking. Or, I mean, I don't know where this is heading. It's terribly worrying.
It is. And I think one of the things that worries me at the moment about the whole COVID thing is that, you know, the restrictions and the lockdown laws and the things that have come in, they are very much, you know, we couldn't go back to doing the kind of things we did with FJ right at the beginning under the current circumstances. Yeah.
That's right. New rules, new laws, and rules for one group and not another.
There is that, definitely. But you know, there is a little bit of, I'm wondering how much of this is, you know, that's going to stay on the statute books and governments are going to be able to use it in the future. So
we could talk forever.
Yeah, I mean, that's, you know, but I think we are going to have to I mean, and that's where I'm hoping that, you know, my experience can come across to other campaign groups out there, and I can give them ideas and give them some, you know, information and some, you know, some sort of strategies of how they can go forward, because there are lots of things that you can do. You know, there'll be those who are happy to sit there and
Nadine,
write.
just tell people, so you've got your own organisation now, helping people with marketing and with, you know, running these sorts of campaigns, running other campaigns. That's one of the things you're doing now.
Yeah, so I'm passing on, you know, my experiences, because I come from a design and marketing background anyway. So my, you know, my whole thought process is probably a little bit more creative than most people, and so putting together campaign strategies is something that I find very interesting. I'm not going to be stopping helping fathers in the courts, because that's a very important resource for, you know, to me, and even if I can change the direction of one person's family life, then, you know, I feel like I've done something worthwhile that day. But there are a lot of people out there at the moment who are running campaigns who are not going to be able to do things the way they used to do. And so we have to now start come up with different ideas and helping them get that message across. Certainly the Mothers for Sons is a fabulous concept, and the message has to get out there. But you are running up a hill, you know, and you have a whole, you know, army of people coming down in front of you who are wanting to silence you. And that is the same for a lot of organizations out there. F4J has gone past that. There's going to be, you know, it's going to be very, very difficult to silence them. But anybody else coming through now is going to find, I think, a very different world to the one we had 20 years ago when that campaign was getting off the ground.
Yep.
And it's
well,
going to be
I'm sure our listeners have been most absorbed in hearing your incredible story, Nadine.
You're
I think
welcome.
you've done some really important work and will continue to do so. And I'm sure you'll hear from many people. I don't know what the best way for, I'll put something up so that.
Yeah, so I mean, they can go via my website and contact me through there. That's not
I'll put details of that up.
Thank you.
Lovely to talk to you. Thanks very much.
To you. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.